everybody, and welcome to another episode of Grow For It. Today, we have another special guest who's a multinational transformational leadership coach, an international inspirational speaker, and author. Thank you very much for joining me today, Regina Huber.
Hi, Nathan. It's great to be here with you today. I'm delighted to be here and to co-inspire with you, hopefully.
Absolutely. Happy to have you. Can you start out by telling us a little bit about your journey and how you got into coaching?
Yeah, sure. So I grew up in Germany and I moved to Spain at the age of 26. Shortly after I was offered a leadership position without actually any relevant leadership background, any experience in that field. So that was my first leadership experience and probably also one of the reasons why later I actually opted for leadership coaching, right? But I didn't know that at the time. I was a little bit thrown into the cold water, so to speak. From there, then I moved to other continents, have had some very exciting experiences, have lived lots of adventures, and also very interesting professional experiences, both as an employee and as an entrepreneur. I have owned businesses in Argentina and Brazil before moving to New York, then starting my current business, which is a coaching, training, and speaking business, which is called Transform Your Performance. So as you said, I'm a transformational leadership and freedom coach, I like to say sometimes, because freedom is a big word in my world and in my work. And I love to inspire people to not just be great leaders in their profession or as entrepreneurs in their business, but also in their lives. So my coaching concept is actually very holistic. We look at the whole life of a person, ideally. Of course, some people come to me and they say, you know what, I really want to work on a promotion. And then we may not have enough time to look at everything else, but it actually does play into everything else because life is a holistic phenomenon. Right? So that's how I like to support my clients. And now through my company, Transform Your Performance, with the same website, I help leaders level up how they lead themselves and others so they can build thriving teams and thriving lives together, not just for themselves, but also for their teams. And yeah, that's a little bit of me. So I've lived on several continents and gained experience over time, that wisdom that one needs to be able to coach others, and definitely also did some of that coaching already in my leadership roles at a global consulting firm.
That's great. Why would you say that freedom is so important in the coaching that you do?
Well, I think everybody strives for freedom in life. It just looks different for different people. To me, freedom has many different faces. I love location freedom. I love to be able to move around to places that I want to live in and also just travel, right? That's just what I enjoy doing. For other people, it's something else. But it's really not just about this external freedom to me. It comes from within. Freedom is an attitude. It's an internal state, right? Because we can have that external freedom and then the circumstances around us and still feel unfree and like we are in a cage. So that's what we really want to strive for, that feeling of freedom, that knowing that we have options, that knowing that we have in reality unlimited possibilities that we might not always see, but we do have them. And I think when we gain this consciousness of having options, sometimes we think we only have two options, right? Why? Because that's how we were brought up. In school, there was right and wrong, and we were not told that we had unlimited options because they probably didn't want us to know that. So now as adults, we know it theoretically maybe, but we're not always living it. And so I want people to be able to embody this freedom and to really live it.
Fantastic. That's certainly a new way of thinking that unlocks a new part of your brain that most people may not even think about. What about in your story? I know you mentioned that early on you were given a leadership position that you didn't feel maybe deserving of, or you didn't have a lot of experience in leadership. What do you think it was that set you apart to get that position? What are things that you learned early on from that experience?
Well, I think that it was because I had a proactive attitude. That's why the leadership potential was seen in me at the time by some of the leaders in the company, right? And I had just moved there like 10 months earlier. I just learned Spanish. This was in Spain, by the way. So it was a bit unexpected. The person who had actually hired me into that position or transferred me from the other office into that position was about to leave. And I was supposed to take her place. Now, I did not get that role without being interviewed. And there were also some external candidates with leadership experience. And, I got the role anyway. And I think it was really because of that attitude that I brought to the table and that intention to make a difference for people. We as leaders, we think we have to have all those leadership skills, right? But what's sometimes more important is to bring a pure intention and to be willing to experiment and to listen to people and see what they need. And then, develop your own leadership style. And of course, yes, I added on leadership skills over time, both through my experience, probably most importantly first, right? And also talking to my boss at the time on a regular basis. And he said something very important to me, which may seem very, very basic to many people. And that was during one of our first meetings while I was in this role, when I asked him for advice for a situation. He said to me, "You know what? I'd be always happy to support you, but always bring solutions." So that's what I never forgot after that meeting. And I always came with possible solutions, even though I might not even have known which one was the right one to pick.
I like that a lot. That's a really good way to set yourself apart in an organization. What would you say has been your proudest moment so far in running your coaching company?
Oh, wow. There have been a few. So first of all, clients, of course, that's how I measure my success, through the success of my clients. Like for example, a $50,000 salary increase is not a bad thing to achieve for a client, right? And we've had that. And she didn't think she would actually get that, and she asked anyway, and she did. So that was really cool. She was well prepared, of course, for the conversation. That's definitely a must. Then there have been some other things that have been very, very fulfilling, apart from those client successes, paying clients. For example, I did a presentation once at the University of Johannesburg, and I was invited to do that presentation literally the day before. So I said, okay, what am I going to do with this group of students? They were first-year students for tourism, and we all wanted this to be about leadership. So I put together a presentation, an interactive presentation, I should say, around inclusive leadership, because I thought, okay, this is something that I can really bring to them in a meaningful way, even though they might never have done anything about leadership, right? So we made it interactive, and I included them in the process. And we really focused on bringing out their unique brilliance and thinking about it. And that's how they understood that, inclusive leadership isn't about categories or characteristics of people or putting people into boxes, as we often see see it done, right? In companies, like with all these groups and whatnot that have been formed. And that is often more divisive than inclusive, in my opinion. So what we did, on the other hand, was we just, they really were eager to participate because they wanted to show that they had something to offer, and then they could see it more easily in others as well. And that's how we built this structure, right? And the story. And it was interesting because like the more like, oh, I'm so cool ones in the back row actually also participated in the front of the room at some point, and the shyest ones too. So it was great to see all of them together, very different personalities participating. And then at the end, I had two very fulfilling experiences. First of all, one guy came up to me after the session and he said, that was the best lecture so far since I started, right? It wasn't a lecture, but that's what he called it. It was more like an interactive session. And then also I got an email a few days later from a lady in the room, and she said, this changed my entire perspective on myself. She said, I now know that who I am has worth. And I think these are the things that give me chills still.
Yep, that's great to be able to have such an impact and be able to touch so many lives and see that kind of change. Talking about your business and how it's grown over the years, can you talk to me about where you started versus where you are now, and kind of how you've grown it intentionally throughout the years?
Yeah, so there have been some ups and downs for sure. Also in the beginning, it was not a very easy time for me after moving to New York City, because my energy was still split between Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, where I had my previous business and where I was cleaning up the mess of a business that didn't go so well because of a fraudulent business partner. So that also had actually pretty much destroyed my self-esteem at the time. So I was rebuilding my confidence as well at the same time, plus dealing with that situation, which was quite intricate. It was a brick and mortar business. So, and the whole, bureaucracy was very, very intense. I started building a new network in a city where I knew practically nobody, and the few people I knew were always traveling because they were whatever consultants or whatever, who always traveled. So I literally started from scratch back then, and with a completely different business, which I had no idea about, right? And so I did participate in a coaching program, but it was just, everything was new. It was it was a completely different concept. So that already was quite challenging, of course. So then, year after year, it developed a little bit differently. In the beginning, I was actually working with performing artists, and then more with entrepreneurs. And then eventually I worked mostly with employees, although not only, I have to say, I still love to work with entrepreneurs. It was just naturally through the networking that I was doing in New York City. I went both to entrepreneurial and employee networking groups, but I took a role at the Financial Women's Association in their leadership team. And this is how I got to set up events and things like that, and had a very active role, and also got to speak at some of their events. And of course, I had a lot of networking opportunities, not just within that leadership team, but also at those events. And this is how naturally, most of my clients suddenly were women in banking. I also then started speaking at banking events, right? So at banks, like, for example, Barclays, BNY Mellon, and whatnot, quite a few of those. And this is how I got clients for the most part. So that was my most effective lead generation tool, really, the speaking and the in-person networking. Now, of course, in 2020, which was actually the year where I had lined up the most speaking opportunities ever, probably before.
Wow.
And also quite a few in Africa, in abroad, and one in London, I remember, one in Hawaii. Kansas City, New York, and some other African countries that I had been to and actually just come back from and signed contracts with, right? So yeah, of course, everything was canceled. So then I had to pivot and start making it work online, which I have to admit has been more challenging than the in-person piece. And the way I have been doing it is through LinkedIn. Of course, even before I was very active on LinkedIn, because if not, I wouldn't have met the people in Africa that I actually did events with, or that invited me to visit, and spend some time with them. So, that, yes, I've always been doing that. But of course, then also LinkedIn got really crowded, as you know, and everybody needed to be on LinkedIn and do business there now. So, and certainly also other platforms, but that was my main playing field, so to speak, right? So yeah, I have been even more active on LinkedIn for sure. I've tried a bunch of things, also hiring people who would help me with LinkedIn, which actually was not a high return on investment, and lots of money invested, to be quite honest. But then I also started a podcast, which I love doing, a leadership podcast. So I've done a lot of different things really online as well. And that's how it's working. I mean, I have still, and this is nice, clients also in Africa at times. Of course, with the exchange rate, sometimes it's a bit more challenging for the coaching programs, but we make it work when necessary. And yeah, and I definitely want to do more speaking again, and actually also more paid speaking. That's in my plans.
And why do you say that it was much harder for you when you had to switch to online coaching versus in-person networking events?
The coaching I'd always been doing on Zoom, right? Most of it. There were very few exceptions that I did in person in New York, but I was working with people like all over the US, or sometimes also a few Latin American people and a few African people. Based in Africa, right? And also occasionally in England or other European places. But what I was referring to was the lead generation. That was easier for me in person, through in-person speaking and in-person networking. Those are my two strongest to date, right? Because that's just what's always worked better for me. I have done masterclasses online and, just tried other things, and it's fine, but the other part is, first of all, also more fun for me. And I think that's also part of it. That's how it is.
That's great. Well, what would you say currently in your business is driving most of your growth?
I would say it is, I occasionally still speak at this point, but because I've had a lot of personal changes going on in my life and moved around a lot, I haven't spent a lot of time in New York City. So it's been much less. I want more of that back, I would say. So that's for sure. And then, I also do online speaking, though. I occasionally do sessions online, also for banks or for other companies. So that is not a bad place to be for me. That's actually really good. And then, and other projects, because I don't only do coaching, right? I also get paid to speak and to set up trainings.
That's great. What would you say on the other side is the hardest part about running your business right now?
Yeah, I would say what I want to do right now is get an updated speaker reel. Okay? Because that is something that I want to change up a little bit. I have created some new talks recently, and they're not really reflected in my older speaker reel. So that's something I'm working on. And of course, that takes a little bit of work because first of all, you need to really master those talks, which in itself is a good time investment. It's fun, but it's also a time investment. And then you need to find audiences where you can also not just test the message, but also then have somebody to film you. Because that's always really been a challenge anyway, Nathan, because what happens is oftentimes when I went to speak at those banks, they very rarely filmed it, very rarely videotaped it. And you cannot always bring people in with you. When they did videotape it, it wasn't always done really well. I thought they would know how to do it really well, but it wasn't really great most of the time. So that, and then also I was, for example, speaking last year at a conference at the New York Stock Exchange, and I was promised that it would be videotaped, but it wasn't. So these are very typical situations for challenges for speakers, right? When you don't have the possibility to bring somebody with you in that very moment, then that can be a challenge to just get the material together.
Yep, well said. If you could wave a magic wand and fix one bottleneck in your current operations or something that bogs you down, what would that be?
Well, as I said, I really want to do more speaking again, and actually also more paid speaking. In the past, I did both lead gen speaking and paid speaking, and sometimes it was a combination of the two things, because sometimes the budgets for those, whatever it was, women networks or whatever it was, weren't really big. So what they would do is either buy books or pay me a small amount, but I would be able to make a free offer. Right. And that's what those strategy calls would be. Now, I actually would love to have more speaking paid speaking gigs. That's really what I want to bring more of into my business. Because I also know that they make a difference in people's lives. It's like every time I go speak somewhere, somebody here's a message that they really needed to hear. And it's usually not just one person, right? And you can make a pretty big impact if you have a strong message and it's also practical at the same time, which usually is the case with the paid speaking because it's required for those engagements. That's when you can reach more people at the same time. And especially leaders, because then they can have a ripple effect again. And that's what I really am looking for.
That's great. And for other coaches out there who are looking for paid speaking events, what would you say have been useful ways or beneficial methods that you've used to actually find those paid speaking events? So
I find most of my paid speaking through networking. Of course, there are speaker websites, there are there's speaker agencies and whatnot. Again, the challenge there is oftentimes you're not seen if you don't have great materials. So if you have a great speaker reel already and a speaker page and whatnot, then yes, it's easier to be seen on those websites and then they will promote you more probably also. And one thing that's happening there is that the speakers that have always gotten the gigs are still getting them. So it's a little bit challenging to make your way to that upper rank in this sense. However, if you do the networking directly, then you can definitely go to companies and speak. I mean, some of them have those, women's events, for example, right? There are so many different ones, different options, or they have lunch meetings where they welcome speakers in, Friday lunch meetings or whatever it is, where even though they might not always have a budget for this, it's a great way to start. And If you have a book, then that's an advantage, because even if they don't have any budget for that event, they might have a learning and development budget and be able to buy your books. And if there are 60 people in the room, for example, and they buy 60 books, which is something that's happened to me at times, then at least, it gives you a few $100s for that event. It might not be huge, but then also you can ask, okay, can I make a free offer? And then, turn it into a lead gen tool. That's always a possibility, but it's also great practice before you then ramp it up to a paid speaking engagement. And, a few years back, I did one that was actually paid quite well with one of the financial institutions that I had done a free event in person in the past. And this time it was online. It was a bigger audience, and it was actually quite well paid for that 1 hour session. So, you never know what comes from it later.
That's great. Those are some fantastic tips, especially for those starting out and looking to get into it. Going back to your business, where would you say, looking a year or 2 years out into the future, where would you like it to be, aside from more speaking events, which you already mentioned?
Yeah, so I would love for it to be at a place where I split my time between VIP clients, so a small group of clients, but with who I can work very intensely, so that they can actually have an even bigger impact as leaders. And I would love to also work with more entrepreneurial leaders, again, who have teams, teams of 10 or more people, maybe, where a lot of entrepreneurs, they go for business coaching, and they work with great business coaches, which I'm not a business coach in that sense, right? I'm a leadership coach, transformational coach as well, and I can help with careers for sure. However, I'm not this hardcore business coach. That's not me. So for that, go somewhere else. But that oftentimes then do not get the leadership piece in that business coaching. And that's where I would like to come in, because it's such an important part of it.
So when you think through it, do you typically think of business coaching for a lot of entrepreneurs as kind of the first step, and then leadership coaching is something that comes after or builds upon that?
I would say ideally you could do it at the same time, but I know it's sometimes challenging if you really want to do it well, with one coach. It also sometimes could interfere a little bit because different coaches have different approaches. But in any case, you should look for somebody who is a great fit for you and your personality anyway, right? So maybe you can find two people with who you work at the same time because you have really chosen them well and they are a great fit for your business. However, if that seems too much, then I would say, okay, look for what you need the most right now. It depends, right? Maybe you've already had some business coaching and you may need some more in the future, but right now it's time to really work on team engagement and bringing the team energy up, learn how to delegate in a way that works, right? Because that's so key for any business. If delegation doesn't work, then the team can fall apart, the motivation level goes down, and nobody's excited anymore. And the leaders are usually then just totally overworked and they cannot do it all the time. So it's really, really important to know how to delegate with growth in mind.
Well, I'm sure you could speak about that for hours if I asked you to, but what's one tip for delegation that you think is really important for people to realize?
Yeah, it's not only about handing off tasks. It's about, as I just said before, delegating with growth in mind. And for that purpose, you need to get your team, you need to get to know your team really well. It's very important to know your team beyond their job descriptions, Who are they? What's their unique brilliance? What are their strengths? And what are their aspirations also? So that you know, what they would step up to. And a second thing I think that's really, really important is to not just hand off tasks, but projects. Now, trust is really key for delegation, but trust is a two-way street. Yes, you need to be able to trust your team in order to delegate, but they also must trust you, right? And the other way around. So oftentimes we expect trust from our team. We want to build trust in our team, but then we do not trust our team to take on responsibility and make decisions. So give them decision-making power. That's how they grow.
That's great. How do you see technology or automation playing a role in your business growth over the next few years?
Yeah, so I use it wisely. I really am not keen on spamming people through automated messages, for example, on LinkedIn, right? Nobody likes to get those, for example. I mean, there's ways of doing those in a meaningful way. I get that, but it has to be done very carefully and with a lot of not just strategy, but a lot of thoughtfulness, I would say, because you can put people off very quickly. And also, and connections and relationships are extremely important to me. My brand image is important in that sense, right? So I use it, but not usually for automated messages. Of course, in order to keep up, I do use some AI like ChatGPT to create my posts. And I use it also. I write quite a few articles because I love writing, not just for my LinkedIn leadership newsletter, but also for magazines and just sometimes also writing contributions for bigger articles. And I do that quite a lot. And of course, if you want to keep up time-wise with other people right now, then you need to also use AI. But I do it in a way that I still can maintain my tone, my voice, my values, my language, because I don't necessarily always use the same language as everybody else. So I don't just say, you need to, just because empathy has become a buzzword, I don't throw that around. I'm very mindful about the language I use. And I'm actually not a fan of talking about empathy in the way it's been talked about. So, and I've written about it. I'm very adamant about these things, right? And about using your language in a way that is meaningful and thoughtful. Our English language and our grammar has already been manipulated enough, and most people don't even know to what extent. So we want to at least be mindful as far as we can easily do it, right? So that's very important to me in the writing process. And so what I usually do is I would ask ChatGPT more than to write the article for a structure, right? And that's also what I did with my recent book, Living My Freaking Amazing Life, which I published last year. The first book I wrote very differently. The approach was very different because I didn't have that AI help. Last year, what I did is I had an idea of what I wanted. I had made a ton of notes over the years because I wanted to do this, actually earlier in my life, but then I pushed it out a little bit. But what I did at the time then is I pulled all my stories together and my notes together. And I was thinking, okay, how can I make this a meaningful book, right? So I determined the goal, I determined my intention, and then I asked ChatGPT, okay, help me structure this book. I need your help for the structure. And that's what saved me quite some time.
That's a great and very wise way to use it. And I like that you're willing to think outside the box and not just go with the flow, not just go with what everyone else is saying, but you're careful with your thought. That's very important for a leader. What would you say, as far as international coaching, does your message change based on different cultures or anything like that? How does coaching people overseas affect the message that you're able to share?
Not really. The message doesn't change because I think the principles of leadership are the same. We all want to be treated in a humane way, want to humanize workplaces. We want to be treated with respect, with care. We want to be cared for. We want to be working with heart-centered leaders. We want to be treated with compassion and all these different things, right? So that's, to me, and self-leadership is the most important thing in it. Self-leadership is the A and O of leadership. That's where it all starts and where it ends, actually, as well. So this is the same universally, Then, of course, you have some cultural nuances. You have ways of treating people in different cultures have different ways. Some are more formal, some are less formal. So that's what I need to adapt to, of course. And also the leadership styles are a bit different. In some places, organizations are more traditional, although we also have more traditional and less traditional places all over the world, right? So I think what I have learned by living and working on several different continents and in different language zones, speaking different languages, which also teach us about the culture and about the way of thinking. What I've learned through that is a high degree of adaptability while always staying true to myself and to my values. So I will not sacrifice those. And even if it's a different culture, all cultures have pieces that are valuable and pieces that are not. And we need to use our own discernment to figure out what makes sense to us, right? And I think if we approach it in that way and with an open mind, then, there's not that much that could go wrong.
Well, that's a great perspective from someone who's seen many different cultures. So I appreciate you sharing that. What would you say if you had to give a tip to someone who's brand new to coaching, just starting their journey? What is one of the biggest things that you wish you knew when you were starting out?
Yeah, one thing that I definitely have learned over time is to, yes, work with coaches, but always determine your own path in a way that don't allow yourself to be talked into anything that you don't want to do. And I have tried to not do that, but sometimes I have pivoted in ways that were not necessarily great for my business just because they were not me. It's not that they were not maybe valuable for other people, but if somebody, for example, says, okay, let's just say you want to work mostly with entrepreneurs, right? And then a coach says, no, but it's much easier to get clients who are employees and they are willing to pay and whatnot. And why don't you work with those? And you don't really feel that, then don't do it. Just stay true to what you truly want to do. There are lots of different coaches for everybody. And there are clients for everybody. And it's just a matter of finding them. It's oftentimes when coaches think, it's better for you, it's because they know that piece better. But then maybe they're not the right coach for you, right? And I know that some coaches, they just say they know it, and you can have 5 conversations with them before you sign up with them, even if it's one-on-one coaching. They will still maintain that they can help you when they cannot. So really, sometimes it's hard to distinguish that. I would never do that because for me, it's really important to work with somebody that I can actually help, right? And plus, my image is also important. Now, there are people, though, who do this for whatever reason. I know it because I have made that experience working with those coaches, right? And then also, especially also in group coaching, when you sign up for a group coaching program, and I know that a lot of coaches get coaching, right? That's why I'm saying this. So when you sign up for those, make sure that it's not a huge group program where you get overwhelmed with everything at the same time, because that's usually a high ticket program that does not necessarily give you the value you need at that point in time. And by the time you would be able to use everything that's offered, that might all be really high quality, but you cannot even use it at the same, it's already outdated. So that's another thing that I have paid a high price for at some point, for something that wasn't really worth it in that sense. It's not because it was bad, but because it wasn't right for me. And then I've also signed up for bad stuff. Okay, but that's...
Yeah, I'm sure we all have every once in a while. But that's a very valuable tip, and even goes back to what you were saying earlier about the value and importance of self-coaching, because it's important to know what you need in different stages of your business. Because there's a lot of different... I'm sure there's many things you can glean from different coaches, but certain coaches you might hit it off with better than others, or some might be able to speak to your situation and your current needs better than others. So that's a great tip that you shared with us. What would you say is the best place for our viewers to find out more information about you and your programs if they're searching?
Definitely my website, transformyourperformance.com, right? So I'm going to say that again, transformyourperformance.com. There's a lot of information on there. There are links to my podcast. There are links to my YouTube channel, to my LinkedIn newsletter. LinkedIn is the one social media where I'm most active in. And that's, I think, of course, my books are also on my website and on Amazon, but you can find everything there, really.
Fantastic. Well, thank you very much for joining us today, Regina. You had a lot of great insights that I think a lot of people will learn from. So I appreciate you.
Thank you so much, Nathan, for the great questions.
Absolutely. Thank you. And thank you to our viewers. If you found this valuable, please leave a like and subscribe, and we'll see you here on another episode of Grow For It. Thank you.